Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Homecoming. The Chicago wind cut through my coat as I pulled into the driveway of my suburban home after 5 grueling days in Detroit. The manufacturing contract negotiations had been brutal, but profitable. Exactly how I preferred my business dealings. As CEO of Midwest Industrial Solutions, I'd built my empire on the principle that weakness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Before I could even kill the engine, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson came rushing out of her house, her silver hair disheveled and her face flushed with what looked like relief. "Oh, thank God you're back, Greg," she called out, practically jogging toward my Mercedes. "She's been such a sweet baby. I took care of her for days." I stepped out, confused, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone to check if I'd missed something important. Mrs. Patterson disappeared back in her house for a moment before emerging with a bundle in her arms. A baby, maybe 6 months old, with dark hair and curious brown eyes. "Here she is," Mrs. Patterson said, beaming as she tried to hand me the child. "Your little angel was no trouble at all." I stared at the baby, my mind racing. "Mrs. Patterson, I think there's been some mistake. I never had a baby." The woman's face went from joy to confusion, then to something approaching horror. "What do you mean? Whose baby is this? Your wife brought her over Tuesday morning, said you two needed help while she handled some emergency at work." My blood turned to ice. I'd been married to Linda for 8 years, and we'd never had children. She'd always claimed she wasn't ready, that her career at the marketing firm came first. But more importantly, Linda had been texting me all week about how quiet and peaceful the house was with me gone. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. 20 minutes later, Detective Ray Hoffman stood in my living room, a weathered man in his 50s who'd seen enough strangeness in his career that nothing surprised him anymore. "So your wife never mentioned babysitting?" he asked, making notes in his pad. "Detective, my wife and I don't have children, and she's never shown interest in babysitting for anyone. This whole situation—" I paused, staring at the baby now, sleeping peacefully in the car seat Mrs. Patterson had provided. "Something's very wrong here." Hoffman nodded. "Where's your wife now?" "She should be home from work soon. She texted me this morning, saying she was excited I was coming back today." As if summoned by our conversation, I heard Linda's BMW pull into the garage. She always parked inside, said kept her car cleaner, though I suspected she just didn't want the neighbors seeing her comings and goings. "Greg," Linda's voice echoed through the house as she entered through the kitchen door. "Welcome home, honey." She appeared in the living room doorway, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer suit making her look like she'd stepped out of a corporate magazine. At 34, Linda still turned heads wherever she went, which had always been a source of pride for me. Now, seeing her confused expression as she noticed the detective and the baby, I felt that pride curdling into something darker. "What's going on? Why is there a police officer here? And whose baby?" Her voice trailed off as her face went pale. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Hoffman. Your neighbor says you left this baby with her for several days while your husband was out of town." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't understand. I've never seen this baby before." The detective and I exchanged glances. Either my wife was lying or Mrs. Patterson was having some kind of mental break. But Mrs. Patterson had seemed perfectly lucid, and she described Linda's car, her appearance, even mentioned that Linda had been wearing her favorite red coat when she dropped the baby off. "Mrs. Patterson seems certain it was you," Detective Hoffman said. "She described your car, your appearance, and said you specifically mentioned this was your baby and that your husband Greg was out of town on business." Linda sank into our leather armchair, her face now completely drained of color. "I swear to you, I have no idea what's happening here. I've been working late every night this week. You can check with my office." I studied my wife's face, looking for the tells I'd learned to read in business negotiations. The slight twitch of her left eye when she was stressed, the way she touched her wedding ring when she was hiding something. But I saw only genuine confusion and fear. We'll need to sort this out, Detective Hoffman said. In the meantime, we need to figure out who this baby belongs to. We'll run her through missing persons databases, check local hospitals for any births that might match. As the detective made his calls, I sat across from Linda, the baby between us like a living question mark. My wife kept staring at the child with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but something else. Something that made my businessman's instinct start screaming that I was missing a crucial piece of this puzzle. Linda, I said quietly, I need you to think very carefully. Is there anything at all, that might explain this? Anyone who might look like you, anyone who might know her schedules. She shook her head, but her hand moved to her wedding ring, her tell. She was lying, or at least not telling me everything. Detective Hoffman hung up his phone. No missing baby reports that match. I'm going to need both of you to come down to the station tomorrow to give formal statements. Tonight, we'll have child services take temporary custody. As we watched the social worker carry the baby away, I realized that whatever was happening here was just the beginning. In my experience, when something seemed impossible, it usually meant someone was working very hard to make it appear that way. And if someone was playing games with my life, my marriage, and my reputation, they were about to learn why I'd never lost a business deal in 15 years. I didn't forgive. I didn't forget. And I sure as hell didn't let anyone make a fool out of me. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The next morning, Linda called in sick to work. She claimed stress from the bizarre situation with the baby, but I noticed she spent most of the morning on her phone, having hushed conversations she ended abruptly whenever I entered the room. I'd built my fortune on reading people, on seeing the angles others missed. 20 years ago, I'd been nothing, a kid from the wrong side of Chicago whose father had died in a factory accident and whose mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. I'd clawed my way up through community college, then Northwestern, then the business world, collecting enemies and crushing obstacles with equal efficiency. Linda had been one of my few weaknesses, a beautiful marketing executive I'd met at a client dinner 7 years ago. She'd been working for a small firm then, ambitious and hungry in a way that reminded me of myself. I'd helped her career along, introduced her to the right people, and when we married 3 years later, I thought I'd found someone who understood the price of success. Now, watching her pace our kitchen while speaking in whispers to someone on the phone, I wondered if I'd been played from the very beginning. Who was that? I asked when she finally hung up. Just work, she said, not meeting my eyes. They wanted to know when I'd be back. Another lie. I'd already called her office that morning, speaking to her assistant Amanda, who'd seemed surprised that Linda was sick and mentioned that Linda had actually requested today off 3 weeks ago. My phone rang. Detective Hoffman. Greg, we need to talk. Can you come in alone this morning? There are some things about this case I want to discuss privately. An hour later, I sat across from Detective Hoffman in an interview room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The baby's not in any missing persons database, he began. But here's where it gets interesting. We ran her DNA through the system for any family matches. And she has a father in the system, arrested 2 years ago for assault and battery. Name's Tyler Morrison, age 36. Ring any bells? The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Tyler Morrison, the creative director Linda had worked with at her previous job. She'd mentioned him frequently during her transition to the new firm, always praising his innovative campaigns and artistic vision. I'd even met him once at an office Christmas party, a tall, lean man with the kind of effortless charm that had always irritated me. I know him, I said carefully. He worked with my wife at her old company. Detective Hoffman leaned forward. Here's the thing, Greg. We reached out to Morrison. Guy claims he's never seen this baby before, says he doesn't have any children. But DNA doesn't lie. You think he's lying? I think someone's lying. Maybe everyone's lying. The question is why. He slid a file across the table. Morrison's got an interesting background. Grew up in foster care, bounced around a lot. The assault charge was for beating up his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. Charges were dropped when the guy refused to cooperate, but Morrison spent 2 months in county lockup. I opened the file, studying Tyler's mugshot. Even the harsh booking photo, he had that artistic, brooding look that some women found irresistible. The kind of man who wrote poetry and talked about feelings, everything I wasn't. There's more, Detective Hoffman continued. We pulled phone records. Your wife and Morrison have been in contact. A lot of contact. Text messages, phone calls, going back about 8 months. The room felt like it was spinning. 8 months. That would put it right around the time Linda started working late, claiming her new job was more demanding. Right around the time she'd become distant, claiming stress from adapting to new workplace dynamics. Do you have the content of those messages? Working on a warrant for that. But Greg, I need to ask you directly. Is there any chance your wife was having an affair? I'd suspected it, of course. The late nights, the sudden interest in working out, the new lingerie I'd found in her drawer that she'd never worn for me. But I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that my success had made me suspicious of everyone's motives. It's possible, I said, because if she was, and if that baby is Morrison's, then we're looking at a whole different scenario. Maybe your wife gave birth in secret. Maybe she was trying to hide the affair by having your neighbor babysit while you were gone. I shook my head. Linda wasn't pregnant. I would have noticed. Would you? You travel a lot for business. And there are ways to hide a pregnancy, especially in the early stages. Hell, there are women who don't know they're pregnant until they give birth. But Detective Hoffman didn't know Linda like I did. She was vain about her figure, obsessive about her appearance. There was no way she could have carried a baby to term without me knowing, unless she'd been planning this deception from the very beginning. As I drove home, my mind raced through the possibilities. If Linda had been having an affair with Tyler Morrison, if she'd gotten pregnant and somehow hidden it from me, then what was the end game? Was she planning to leave me? Had this whole baby situation been some kind of test or mistake in a larger plan? I thought about my prenuptial agreement, ironclad, drafted by the best lawyers in Chicago. If Linda was having an affair, she'd get nothing in a divorce. But if she could prove the child was mine, if she could somehow manipulate the situation, I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, studying my house. From the outside, it looked perfect, the kind of suburban success story I'd worked my entire life to achieve. But inside, everything was rotting. Linda was in the living room when I entered, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, looking fragile and vulnerable. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. How was the police station? She asked. Informative. I sat down across from her, studying her face. They found the baby's father. Linda's cup rattled against its saucer. Oh, Tyler Morrison, your old colleague. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She set down her tea and wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand, she whispered. Don't you? I leaned forward. Because the police have records of you two talking regularly for the past 8 months. That's a lot of contact with a former colleague. Linda's mask finally cracked. She began to cry. Not the pretty, delicate tears she used when she wanted something, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her entire body. Greg, please, I can explain. Then explain. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I made a mistake. Tyler and I, we had an affair. It started innocently, just working late together, and then you got pregnant. She nodded, unable to speak. Where have you been giving birth? Where have you been hiding this child for 6 months? Tyler has a cabin up in Wisconsin. I've been staying there weekends when you travel. He's been helping me take care of her. The picture was becoming clearer, but it still didn't make complete sense. So why did Mrs. Patterson have the baby? Why the elaborate charade? Linda wiped her eyes, and for a moment, I saw something calculating in her expression. Tyler's been pressuring me to leave you. He wants us to be a family. But I know what the prenup says, Greg. I know I'd get nothing if you could prove adultery. So you thought you'd, what? Introduce the baby gradually? Make me think she was mine? I didn't know what to do. Linda's voice rose to a wail. Tyler said if I didn't leave you this week, he'd tell you everything himself. He said he was tired of hiding. So I brought Emma to Mrs. Patterson, told her she was ours, that we needed help because of your business trip. I thought maybe if you met her, if you saw how sweet she was. You thought I'd what? Agree to raise another man's child? Forgive your betrayal. Linda stared at me with desperate hope. You love me, Greg. I know you do. And Emma's just a baby. She's innocent in all this. I stood up slowly, my mind already working through the implications, the possibilities, the angles. Linda watched me with growing fear as I walked to the window and stared out at the perfectly manicured lawn I paid a service to maintain. "You're right about one thing," I said without turning around. "Emma is innocent, but you're not, and neither is Tyler Morrison. What are you going to do?" I turned back to face my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "I'm going to destroy you both." Chapter 3: The Art of War. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the tools of my trade. Multiple phones, encrypted computers, and files on every major player in Chicago's business community. I'd built my empire by understanding that information was more valuable than money, and that patience was more powerful than rage. Linda was upstairs packing. I told her she had until morning to get out of my house. She'd begged, pleaded, promised it would never happen again, but I'd made my position clear. Our marriage was over, and she would get exactly what the prenuptial agreement specified for adultery. Nothing. But that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I started with Tyler Morrison, pulling everything I could find on him through my network of private investigators and corporate contacts. What I discovered painted a picture of a man who thought he was cleverer than he actually was. Tyler had grown up in the foster system, bouncing between homes until he'd aged out at 18. He'd put himself through art school, working nights as a bartender while studying graphic design during the day. His talent was undeniable. I'd seen some of his work at Linda's old company, and even I had to admit he had a gift for visual storytelling. But talent without discipline was just wasted potential, and Tyler Morrison was undisciplined in every way that mattered. He'd been fired from 3 jobs for inappropriate relationships with colleagues, had racked up significant debt pursuing his artistic vision, and had a pattern of seducing married women who could advance his career. Linda wasn't his first affair with a client's wife. She was just the first one stupid enough to get pregnant. My phone rang. "Detective Hoffman." "Greg, we've got Morrison in custody for questioning. Thought you'd want to know." "On what charges?" "Child abandonment, for starters. If what your wife told you is true, he left his biological child with a stranger without ensuring proper care arrangements. Could also be looking at fraud charges, depending on how this whole scheme was supposed to play out." I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Tyler was about to learn that actions had consequences, and mine were always permanent. "What about Linda?" "She's cooperating fully. Gave us a written statement about the affair, the pregnancy, everything." "But Greg..." Hoffman paused. "You might want to get yourself a good lawyer. This thing's about to get messy." After hanging up, I called my attorney, David Krause, who'd handle my prenup and every major business deal I'd ever made. David was like me, a man who understood that winning wasn't enough if your opponents were still able to fight tomorrow. "Dave, I need you to file divorce papers first thing tomorrow morning. Adultery, abandonment, the works. And I want to move fast on asset protection." "Already drafting them," Dave said. "But Greg, there's something you need to consider. If Morrison's pressuring Linda to leave you, if he's threatening exposure, this might not be over just because you divorce her." He was right, of course. Tyler Morrison wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. He was the type of man who'd see me as an obstacle to overcome, not an opponent to avoid. And Linda, despite her tears and promises, had betrayed me once. She'd do it again if she thought it would benefit her. I needed them both gone permanently. The next morning, Linda left our house with 2 suitcases and the knowledge that she'd just lost access to a lifestyle worth millions. I watched from my office window as she loaded her car, her movements sharp and angry now that the performance was over. She was on a Tyler, of course. They'd console each other, plot together, maybe even convince themselves that they could salvage something from this disaster. They were wrong. My first call was to Patricia Henley, Linda's boss at the marketing firm. Patricia and I had a history. She'd once made the mistake of trying to undercut one of my companies in a bidding war. I'd crushed her so thoroughly that she'd had to restructure her entire business model. She owed me, and she knew it. "Patricia, it's Greg Donovan. I need a favor." "Greg, I heard about Linda. I'm so sorry." "Save it. Linda won't be coming back to work. I assume you'll be conducting an internal investigation into how she used company resources to facilitate her affair. Silence on the other end. Patricia was smart enough to understand the implications. Of course, she said finally. We take workplace conduct very seriously. Good. I'd hate to have to review our vendor contracts and find reasons to terminate them. Linda's career in Chicago was finished. But that was just the beginning. My second call was to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in the kind of problems that required creative solutions. Marcus had helped me acquire compromising information on business rivals, locate hidden assets during acquisitions, and generally handle the messier aspects of corporate warfare. Marcus, I need everything you can find on Tyler Morrison. Financial records, employment history, personal relationships, medical records if you can get them. And I need to know where he's living now, who he's talking to, what his plans are. How deep do you want me to go with this? All the way to the bottom. By the time Tyler Morrison was released from police questioning that afternoon, I'd already begun systematically dismantling his life. His freelance clients received anonymous tips about his professional misconduct, supported by documentation of his previous firings. His landlord received notice of building code violations that would require expensive repairs. His bank received reports of suspicious activity that would trigger a financial investigation. But the real masterpiece was still to come. That evening, I drove to the seediest bar I could find on the south side of Chicago, a place where the lighting was dim and the clientele didn't ask questions. I wasn't there for the atmosphere. I was there to meet Vincent Carballo. Vincent was a man who solved problems for people who could afford his services. He wasn't a traditional criminal. He was more of a consultant who specialized in pressure, intimidation, and making people disappear from public view without technically breaking any major laws. Mr. Donovan, Vincent said, sliding into the booth across from me. He was a small, neat man in an expensive suit who looked more like an accountant than an enforcer. I heard you might have need of my services. I have a problem, I said. Two problems, actually. A cheating wife and her lover who think they can manipulate me. Vincent smiled. And you'd like them to reconsider that position? I'd like them to understand that betraying me was the worst mistake of their lives. I want them to wish they'd never met each other, never met me, never been born. That's a comprehensive request. It'll require a comprehensive solution. We talked for an hour, Vincent taking notes in a small black book as I outlined exactly what I wanted done. By the time we shook hands, Tyler Morrison and Linda's comfortable new life together was living on borrowed time. I drove home through the empty Chicago streets, feeling more satisfied than I had in months. Linda and Tyler thought they'd won something by being together, but they'd actually just made themselves easier targets. Tomorrow, they'd begin to understand what it meant to cross Greg Donovan. And by the time I was finished with them, they'd serve as a warning to anyone else who might be tempted to take what was mine. In my experience, there were two types of people in the world, predators and prey. Linda and Tyler had mistaken me for the latter. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. Tyler Morrison lived in a converted warehouse loft in an up-and-coming neighborhood that still had enough rough edges to keep the rent affordable. I knew this because Marcus Webb had provided me with a detailed report on Tyler's living situation, financial status, and daily routine. I also knew that Linda had been staying there since leaving our house 3 days ago. They thought they were building something together. They had no idea they were actually digging their own graves. Marcus called me at 6 a.m. with the first update. Morrison's freelance contracts are drying up, he reported. Word's getting around that he's unreliable and that assault charge from 2 years ago isn't helping his reputation. 3 clients terminated their agreements yesterday. What about his living situation? That's where it gets interesting. The warehouse is owned by a shell company that's owned by another shell company. Turns out the ultimate owner is Gregory Chun. Remember him? I remembered Gregory Chun very well. A real estate developer who'd tried to screw me over on a property deal 5 years ago. I cost him millions in that transaction, and he'd sworn revenge. Apparently, he'd been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor. Chun doesn't know Morrison is involved with your ex-wife yet, Marcus continued. But when he finds out, make sure he finds out, I said. Today, by noon, Tyler Morrison was getting an eviction notice. His landlord, acting on orders from Gregory Chun, had discovered multiple lease violations and was terminating his tenancy immediately. Tyler would have 72 hours to vacate the premises. But that was just the opening move. Linda called me that afternoon, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. "Greg, you can't do this. Tyler's done nothing wrong. Tyler committed adultery with my wife and fathered a child he then abandoned with a stranger. I'd say that's quite a bit wrong. The eviction, the job losses, you're destroying an innocent man's life." I almost laughed. Innocent? Linda, Tyler Morrison has a pattern of seducing married women for career advancement. You weren't his first victim, and you wouldn't have been his last if I hadn't intervened. What do you mean I wasn't his first? Ask him about Rebecca Martinez, the gallery owner whose husband discovered their affair and sued Tyler for alienation of affection. Or ask him about Jennifer Walsh, the department store executive who lost her job when their relationship became public. Tyler's a professional homewrecker. Linda, he saw you as a meal ticket, and you were too infatuated to see it. Silence on the other end of the line. "You're lying," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Check his laptop, Linda. Look at his emails, his dating profiles, his financial records. See how many married women he's been in contact with over the past year. See how many of them made mysterious payments to his accounts. I hung up, knowing I'd planted the seeds of doubt that would do more damage than any external pressure I could apply. Tyler and Linda's relationship was built on lies and manipulation. All I had to do was expose the truth and let human nature take its course. Vincent Carballo called that evening. "Phase 2 is ready to implement," he said. "Morrison's about to discover that his past has caught up with him." "What did you find? Remember that assault charge from 2 years ago?" The victim was Marcus Torres, a construction worker who was dating Morrison's ex-girlfriend. Torres moved to Phoenix after the incident, tried to put it behind him. But he's back in Chicago now, and he's not happy to learn that Morrison never paid the restitution he agreed to as part of the plea deal. How much restitution? $15,000. Plus interest, we're looking at about 22 grand. Torres is filing a civil suit tomorrow, and he's got friends in the construction union who remember what Morrison did. I felt another flicker of satisfaction. Tyler was about to learn that running away from problems didn't make them disappear. It just meant they were waiting for you when you least expected them. The next morning, Tyler Morrison was served with papers in 3 separate lawsuits: civil action for unpaid restitution, breach of contract from a former client, and a paternity suit filed on behalf of baby Emma. He was also visited by representatives of the Construction Workers Union who wanted to discuss his outstanding debt to one of their members. By the time the union representatives finished explaining the situation to Tyler, he was missing 2 teeth and had a clear understanding that his debt was accruing interest daily. Linda called me again that night, sobbing. "Greg, please, you have to stop this. Tyler's in the hospital. Someone beat him up, and the police won't do anything because they say it's a civil matter." "I told you, Linda. Actions have consequences. This is insane. You're destroying both our lives over a mistake." "A mistake?" I let my voice drop to the tone I used in boardrooms when I was about to crush an opponent. "You had an affair for 8 months. You got pregnant with another man's child. You tried to manipulate me into raising that child as my own. That's not a mistake, Linda. That's a calculated betrayal. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Of course you didn't. You meant to get away with it. You meant to have your affair and keep your comfortable lifestyle. You meant to use me as a safety net while you explored your options with Tyler. But you got caught, and now you're facing the consequences. What do you want from us? What will it take for you to leave us alone?" I considered the question seriously. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or something more permanent? "I want Tyler Morrison to disappear from Chicago," I said finally. "I want him to understand that he can never come back, never contact you again, never even think about this city without remembering what happens to people who cross me. And if he does that, if he leaves, then maybe you'll live long enough to regret your choices." I hung up before she could respond. The truth was, I wasn't sure Tyler leaving would be enough. He'd humiliated me, made me look like a fool in front of my neighbors and colleagues. He turned my wife against me and tried to steal my life. Men like that didn't just disappear, they waited for opportunities to strike back, which meant I needed to make sure Tyler Morrison never got that opportunity. Morrison's been asking around about you, he reported. Seems he's figured out that his recent troubles aren't coincidental. He's looking for leverage, something he can use to make you back off. What kind of leverage? Business rivals, disgruntled employees, anyone with a grudge against you. He's not finding much, but he's persistent. That was a problem. Tyler was smarter than I'd given him credit for, and desperate men did unpredictable things. If he couldn't fight me directly, he might try to expose some of my less legitimate business practices or find a way to turn my own enemies against me. What do you recommend? I asked. We accelerate the timeline. Make him disappear before he can cause real trouble. Permanently. That's your call, Mr. Donovan. But men like Morrison don't learn from pain. They only understand finality. I stared out my office window at the city lights, considering my options. I'd built my empire on the principle that some problems required permanent solutions. Tyler Morrison was becoming one of those problems. Set up a meeting, I said. Tomorrow night. Tell him I want to discuss terms for his departure from Chicago. And if he doesn't agree to your terms, then we'll discuss the alternatives. By the time I hung up, I'd made my decision. Tyler Morrison had declared war on me the moment he seduced my wife. Now, he was going to learn what happened when you brought a knife to a gunfight. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this would end. Chapter 5. The Devil's Bargain. The meeting was set for midnight at Navy Pier, in the shadow of the Ferris wheel where tourists came to see the city lights. I chose the location deliberately, public enough to seem safe, isolated enough for privacy, and symbolic enough to send a message. Tyler Morrison was about to get a very clear view of the city he'd be leaving forever. I arrived early, positioning myself near the railing with a clear view of the approaches. At 52, I'd learned to never walk into a situation without understanding all the angles. Marcus Webb was positioned nearby with a camera to document whatever happened, and Vincent Carballo was close enough to intervene if things went sideways. Tyler arrived at exactly midnight, and I had to admit he had courage. His face was still bruised from his encounter with the construction workers. His left arm was in a sling, and he walked with a slight limp. But his eyes were clear and angry, the look of a man who decided he had nothing left to lose. You wanted to talk, he said without preamble. So talk. You're a smart man, Tyler. You've figured out that your recent troubles aren't coincidental. You've been systematically destroying my life for the past week. My job, my home, my relationships, all gone because you can't handle the fact that your wife chose me over you. I smiled at that. Is that what you think happened? That Linda chose you. She's carrying my child. She was ready to leave you before this whole mess started. Tyler, Linda was never going to leave me. She likes the lifestyle too much, the house, the cars, the social status. You were her midlife crisis, not her future. His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Tell me, Tyler, how many times did Linda promise to leave me over the past 8 months? How many times did she say she just needed a little more time to figure out the logistics? I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. Linda had been stringing him along, just like she'd been stringing me along, playing both ends against the middle while she figured out her best option. The truth is, I continued, Linda never had any intention of giving up her comfortable life for a struggling artist with debt problems and an assault record. She was using you for excitement, and she was using me for security. The baby was an accident that forced her hand. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify what you've done to me, doesn't it? You seduced a married woman, got her pregnant, and then tried to blackmail her into leaving her husband. You abandoned your own child with a stranger when the situation became inconvenient. You've been lying to Linda about your financial situation and your history with other married women. I leaned forward. You're not a victim here, Tyler. You're a predator who finally met a bigger predator. Tyler was silent for a long moment, staring out at the dark water of Lake Michigan. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you gone. Not just from Chicago, from the Midwest entirely. I want you to start over somewhere far away, with a new identity if necessary, and I never want to hear your name again. And if I refuse, Then your problems up to this point will seem like minor inconveniences compared to what comes next. I gestured to the city lights spread out before us. I own this city, Tyler. I have connections in every industry, every neighborhood, every level of government. I can make sure you never work again, never find housing, never have a moment's peace. Or I can make sure you simply disappear. The threat hung in the air between us like smoke. Tyler understood what I was offering, exile or death. You're insane, he said. I'm thorough. There's a difference. Tyler was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, resigned, defeated. How much? Excuse me. If I leave, how much are you willing to pay to make sure I stay gone? I hadn't expected him to negotiate, but I had to admire his pragmatism. Even facing complete destruction, he was looking for an angle. 50,000, I said. Cash. In exchange for a signed confession about your affair with Linda, your abandonment of your child, and your agreement to relocate at least 1,000 miles from Chicago with no contact with Linda or anyone else connected to this situation. That's not enough to start over. It's more than you had when you seduced my wife. And it's considerably more than you'll have if you refuse. Tyler stared at the water again. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. He was smart enough to know that $50,000 in his life was a better deal than pride and a shallow grave. I want 60, he said finally. 55, and that's final. Deal. He turned to face me. But I have conditions. You're not in a position to make conditions. One condition, he corrected. I want to see Emma one more time. She's my daughter, and I want to say goodbye. I considered this. Tyler seeing the baby was a risk. It might rekindle his paternal instincts, make him reconsider leaving. But it was also an opportunity to demonstrate my complete control over the situation. Fine. Tomorrow afternoon. 1 hour, supervised. And then you're gone. We shook hands, sealing the deal. As Tyler walked away into the night, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since closing my first major business acquisition. I'd identified a threat, neutralized it, and turned a potential enemy into a controlled asset. But as I watched Tyler disappear into the shadows, I realized I might have made an error in judgment. I'd assumed he was just another weak man who could be bought or intimidated. I treated him like a business problem to be solved rather than a human being with his own agenda. Tyler Morrison was leaving Chicago, but I had a growing suspicion that this wasn't over. Men like him didn't simply disappear. They waited, planned, and looked for opportunities to even the score. I'd have to make sure he never got that opportunity. Vincent appeared beside me, as if materializing from the darkness. You think he'll keep the deal? Vincent asked. For a while. But Tyler Morrison is the type of man who holds grudges. Sooner or later, he'll convince himself that he can come back and reclaim what he thinks is his. So what's the real plan? I smiled, looking out at the city lights that represented everything I'd built and everything I was willing to protect. The real plan, Vincent, is to make sure Tyler Morrison never makes it to wherever he's planning to go. Chapter 6, Blood in the Water. The next afternoon, I arranged for Tyler to meet baby Emma at a neutral location, a family court facility where supervised visitations were conducted. I wanted witnesses, official records, and most importantly, I wanted Tyler to understand that this meeting was happening because I allowed it, not because he had any rights. Linda was there too, holding Emma with the awkward uncertainty of someone still learning to be a mother. She looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like a woman who was finally beginning to understand the scope of what she'd lost. Tyler entered the visitation room with the careful movements of a man whose body was still healing from his recent beating. But his eyes were focused entirely on the baby, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't expected, genuine love. She's beautiful, he whispered, reaching out to touch Emma's tiny hand. Linda looked between Tyler and me, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Tyler, what's happening? Greg said you wanted to see Emma, but he won't tell me why. Tyler took the baby, holding her with surprising competence. I'm leaving, Linda. Tonight. What do you mean, leaving? Leaving for where? Away. Far away. Your husband has made it clear that Chicago isn't big enough for both of us. Linda's face went white. No. Tyler, we can fight this. We can. Fight what? Fight him. Tyler gestured toward me with his free hand. Look what he's done to me in 1 week. Look what he's done to us. I've lost my job, my home, my savings. I'm facing 3 lawsuits and a group of union workers who want to collect on an old debt with interest. And that's just the beginning. But Emma will be better off without me. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. At least until she's old enough to understand why her father had to disappear. I watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. Tyler was doing exactly what I'd hoped, destroying Linda's remaining illusions about their relationship while simultaneously removing himself as a threat. In one conversation, he was eliminating both the competition and the complications. Tyler, please, Linda pleaded. We can go with you. Emma and I can. No. Tyler handed the baby back to Linda. Your husband is right about one thing. You are never going to leave your comfortable life for an uncertain future with me. This whole situation just forced you to confront that reality sooner than you expected. Linda began to cry, the same desperate sobs I'd heard on the phone. But this time, Tyler didn't comfort her. This time, he just stood up and walked toward the door. Tyler, Linda called after him. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Emma one last time. Take care of her, he said. And Linda, be careful. You're about to learn what it's like to be alone with someone who doesn't forgive. With that ominous warning, Tyler Morrison walked out of the visitation room, and I thought out of our lives forever. I was wrong. That evening, I received a call from Vincent Carballo. We have a problem, he said. Morrison didn't go home to pack. He didn't go to a hotel. He just disappeared. What do you mean, disappeared? I mean, he left the court building and vanished. My people lost him in downtown traffic, and he hasn't been seen since. His phone is off, his credit cards haven't been used, and nobody's heard from him. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Tyler Morrison had just demonstrated that he was much more dangerous than I'd anticipated. Instead of accepting defeat and fleeing like a beaten dog, he'd gone underground. That suggested planning, resources, and most importantly, a strategy one hadn't anticipated. Find him, I said. Working on it. But Greg, if he's gone this deep this fast, he'd help. Someone with serious resources and serious skills. What kind of help? The kind that makes people disappear for a living. The kind that knows how to stay hidden from guys like me. I hung up and immediately called Marcus Webb. Marcus, I need you to dig deeper into Tyler Morrison's background. Financial records, personal relationships, military service, if any. Find out if he has connections to people who could help him disappear. Already on it, Marcus said. But there's something you should know. Morrison's been busy this week. While you were dismantling his life, he was making copies of things. What kind of things? Documents, records, photos. He's been building a file on you, Greg. Your business practices, your associates, your methods. If he's planning something, he's got ammunition. The pieces were starting to come together in a pattern I didn't like. Tyler Morrison hadn't been the desperate, broken man I'd thought he was. He'd been playing a deeper game, gathering intelligence while appearing to be defeated. How much does he have? Enough to cause problems. Financial records that might interest the IRS, photos of you meeting with Vincent Carballo, documentation of some of your more aggressive business tactics. Nothing illegal, necessarily, but enough to make you look bad if it ended up in the wrong hands. Like the media, or law enforcement, or business rivals, or federal investigators. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with facing a serious threat. Tyler Morrison had just escalated from a personal problem to a professional one, and that changed everything. Keep digging, I told Marcus. I want to know everything about Morrison's disappearance. Who helped him, where he went, what his long-term plan is. And if we find him, then we make sure he never gets a chance to use whatever information he's collected. After hanging up, I poured myself a scotch and stood at my office window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Tyler Morrison was out there somewhere, planning his next move with patience and intelligence I'd underestimated. He played the role of the defeated lover perfectly while actually preparing for war. I had to admire the strategy, even as I began planning his destruction. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. You thought you won. You thought I was broken. You were wrong about everything. This isn't over. T. A minute later, another message. Check your email. I opened my laptop and found a message from an encrypted account containing a single attachment. A photo of me shaking hands with Vincent Carballo at Navy Pier, taken with a telephoto lens that captured every detail of our meeting. The message was clear. Tyler Morrison wasn't running. He was hunting, and he just declared open season on me. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. For the first time in 15 years, I felt genuinely afraid. Not the healthy caution that had kept me alive in the business world, but the cold, creeping fear that came with facing an opponent who understood my weaknesses better than I understood theirs. Tyler Morrison had spent the week studying me while I'd been dismantling his life. He'd identified my methods, my associates, my pressure points. And now he was using that knowledge to turn the tables. The photo of me with Vincent Carballo was just the opening shot. Over the next 3 days, I received a steady stream of messages from Tyler's encrypted account. Security camera footage of me entering Marcus Webb's office. Financial records showing payments to various consultants over the past 5 years. Audio recordings of phone conversations I'd thought were private. Documentation of the techniques I'd used to destroy business rivals. Tyler Morrison had been collecting evidence of every gray area and questionable decision in my professional life. None of it was technically illegal, but all of it was morally ambiguous enough to destroy my reputation if it became public. He's been planning this for months, Marcus Webb told me during an emergency meeting in my office. This wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate attempt at blackmail. Morrison has been systematically building a case against you since the affair began. Why? I asked. What's his endgame? Complete destruction. He wants to tear down everything you've built, turn you into a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power. And Linda? Where does she fit into this? Marcus pulled out a file folder. That's where it gets interesting. Morrison hasn't contacted Linda since he disappeared. As far as we can tell, she has no idea what he's planning. I thought about Linda, alone in whatever cheap apartment she'd managed to find with her limited resources, struggling to care for a baby while dealing with the collapse of everything she'd thought her life would be. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. So Morrison is operating independently, I said. It gets worse. We traced some of his funding sources. Morrison isn't just working alone. He's been in contact with Gregory Chun, Patricia Henley, and at least 3 other people you've had business conflicts with over the years. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Tyler Morrison hadn't just declared war on me personally. He'd assembled a coalition of my enemies, united by their shared desire to see me fall. They're funding his operation and providing resources. Chun gave him access to safe houses. Henley provided inside information about your business relationships, and the others contributed various forms of support. Morrison positioned himself as the catalyst for bringing you down, and they were all eager to help. I sat back in my chair, reassessing everything I thought I knew about the situation. Tyler Morrison wasn't a desperate man making threats. He was the coordinator of a sophisticated campaign designed to destroy me personally and professionally. What's his timeline? Unknown. But based on the evidence he's collected, he could go public at any time. And when he does, it'll be coordinated across multiple channels: media, law enforcement, business partners, social media. He's planning a complete character assassination. My phone rang. Detective Hoffman. Greg, we need to talk. There have been some new developments in the Morrison case. An hour later, I sat across from Detective Hoffman in the same interview room where we'd first discussed Tyler Morrison's identity as Emma's father. Someone's been feeding us information about your involvement in Morrison's disappearance, Hoffman said, without preamble. What kind of information? Photos, audio recordings, financial records. Someone wants us to believe you hired muscle to intimidate Morrison into leaving town. I kept my expression neutral. That's a serious accusation. It's also a hard one to prove without Morrison's testimony. But if Morrison turns up dead, Greg, you're going to be the prime suspect. Are you planning to arrest me? Not yet, but I'm going to advise you to get a lawyer and be very careful about your next moves. Someone's building a case against you, and they're being very methodical about it. As I left the police station, I realized Tyler Morrison had just demonstrated another layer of his strategy. He wasn't just planning to destroy my reputation. He was setting me up to be arrested for his murder, even though he was very much alive. Vincent Carballo called me that evening. "We found Morrison," he said. "Where?" "That's the problem. He's in federal protective custody. Turns out he's been cooperating with an FBI investigation into organized crime connections in Chicago business." Your name came up. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Tyler Morrison hadn't just been gathering evidence against me personally. He'd been building a federal case. The FBI was using him as an informant to investigate the gray areas of Chicago business, and I was one of their primary targets. How long has this been going on? Best guess? Since before he met Linda. Morrison's background check came back clean because he's been working for the feds. The assault charge, the debts, the professional problems, all fabricated to give him a believable cover story. I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. Complete, helpless rage. Tyler Morrison wasn't Linda's artistic lover who'd gotten in over his head. He was a federal operative who'd seduced my wife as part of a long-term investigation into my business practices. Everything, the affair, the pregnancy, the baby, Linda's betrayal, had been orchestrated by the FBI to get close to me. "What's his real name?" I asked. Tyler Morrison is his real name, but he's been working undercover for the Bureau for 8 years. Linda never had a chance. He was specifically assigned to get close to her as a way of getting to you. My marriage, my personal life, my trust, all of it had been weaponized against me by federal agents who saw me as a target worthy of a multi-year investigation. "Vincent," I said quietly. "Yeah. Find out where Morrison's family lives. His real family. Parents, siblings, anyone who matters to him." "Greg, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm thinking that Special Agent Tyler Morrison is about to learn that some games have consequences nobody teaches you about in federal training. The Bureau will what? Admit they used an illegal seduction operation to gather evidence? Reveal that they had one of their agents father a child as part of a cover identity? Morrison went rogue the moment he got Linda pregnant, and the FBI knows it. There was silence on the other end of the line. "This is going to get very ugly," Vincent said finally. It was always going to get ugly. Morrison just chose the level of ugliness. After hanging up, I walked to my home safe and removed a file I'd hoped never to use. A comprehensive dossier on federal agents who'd investigated me over the years, compiled by Marcus Webb as an insurance policy. Tyler Morrison's Real file was thin. He'd been careful to keep his personal life separate from his professional one. But everyone had weaknesses, and everyone had people they cared about. It was time for Special Agent Morrison to discover what happened when someone turned Greg Donovan's life into a federal case study. Chapter 8, Scorched Earth. Tyler Morrison's real family lived in a small town in rural Michigan. His adoptive parents, who'd taken him in when the foster system had failed, and a younger sister who taught elementary school and had never known about her brother's real profession. They were good people, the kind of quiet, decent Americans who trusted that their government operated within moral boundaries. They were about to learn otherwise. I didn't target them directly. That would have been crude and ultimately counterproductive. Instead, I orchestrated a series of events that would demonstrate to Tyler Morrison that his decision to involve federal law enforcement had consequences extending far beyond our personal conflict. Marcus Webb's investigation revealed that Morrison's adoptive father ran a small construction company that depended on federal contracts for military housing projects. A few anonymous reports about safety violations and billing irregularities triggered an investigation that would tie up his business for months. Morrison's sister's school district suddenly faced questions about their federal grant compliance, questions that required expensive audits and legal consultations that strained their already tight budget. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable back to me, but enough pressure to send a clear message. Tyler Morrison's war against me was affecting innocent people who'd had the misfortune of caring about him. The message was received. Morrison called me directly, bypassing all the encrypted communication methods he'd been using. "You son of a bitch," he said without preamble. "Leave my family out of this." "Your family?" "Tyler, I thought federal agents were trained not to form personal attachments that could be exploited by targets of investigation. This is between you and me." "No, It stopped being between you and me the moment you involved the FBI. Now it's between me and the federal government, and unfortunately, your family is caught in the crossfire. I'll make you a deal. You'll make me a deal? I laughed. Tyler, you're a federal informant who seduced a married woman, got her pregnant, and abandoned the resulting child. Do you really think you're in a position to negotiate? The FBI. The FBI is going to hang you out to dry the moment this becomes public. You think they want to explain how one of their agents impregnated a target's wife during an undercover operation? You think they want to admit they've been running illegal honey trap operations? Silence on the other end of the line. Here's what's going to happen, Tyler. You're going to end your cooperation with the FBI. You're going to destroy whatever evidence you've collected against me. And you're going to disappear so completely that even the Bureau can't find you. And if I don't, then your family's problems are just beginning. And Linda's life becomes considerably more difficult. You can't touch Linda. She's the mother of my child. Your child? Tyler, you abandoned Emma the moment you went underground. As far as the law is concerned, you're a deadbeat father who fled to avoid child support responsibilities. It was true. Tyler's disappearance had automatically triggered abandonment proceedings, and I'd used my legal resources to expedite the process. Linda was now officially a single mother with no legal claim to support from the baby's biological father. Linda's struggling, Tyler. No job, no income, no support system. She's living in a one-bedroom apartment in a questionable neighborhood, trying to care for an infant with no help and dwindling savings. Of course, I could help her situation improve if I was motivated to do so. What do you want? Complete capitulation. End your federal cooperation. Return all evidence against me, and disappear permanently. In exchange, your family's problems disappear, and Linda gets the financial support she needs to raise your daughter properly. You're asking me to abandon everything. I'm asking you to choose your crusade against me or the welfare of the people you claim to care about. Tyler was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, resigned, defeated. How do I know you'll keep your word? Because unlike you, Tyler, I don't break my promises. When I tell someone I'm going to destroy them, I follow through. When I tell someone I'll protect them, I mean it. I need guarantees. You need to trust that I have more to lose than you do if this arrangement falls apart. The FBI investigation dies if you disappear completely. They lose their primary source and their case falls apart. But if you stay active, eventually the truth about your methods comes out, and we both get destroyed in the resulting scandal. Another long pause. I want to see Emma one more time before I go. No, Greg. No, Tyler. You made your choice when you decided to be a federal informant instead of just Linda's lover. You don't get to play the devoted father card now. I hung up before he could respond. Vincent called me an hour later. Morrison's agreed to the terms, he reported. He's meeting with his FBI handler tonight to terminate his cooperation. All evidence against you will be destroyed. And his disappearance? Permanent. The Bureau's arranging a new identity, new location, new life. They want this whole operation buried, as much as you do. What about Linda? She doesn't know about Morrison's real identity. As far as she's concerned, he was just her lover who got cold feet and abandoned her and the baby. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction at eliminating the threat, anger at being manipulated for years, and something approaching pity for Linda, who'd been used by both Tyler and me in different ways. Set up a trust fund for Emma, I told Vincent. Anonymous donor, enough to cover her education and basic needs through college. Feeling generous? Feeling responsible. None of this was the child's fault. After Vincent left, I sat in my office contemplating the wreckage of the past few weeks. I'd won, in the sense that I'd eliminated the threats against me and maintained control of my life and business. But the victory felt hollow. Tyler Morrison had been a federal agent, which meant everything about my relationship with Linda had been tainted from the beginning. Her affair wasn't a personal betrayal. It was an intelligence operation. Her pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was an operational complication that the FBI was probably still trying to figure out how to handle. And Emma, the innocent baby at the center of everything, was the child of a federal agent and a woman who'd been manipulated into betraying her husband. I walked to the window and looked out at Chicago, the city I'd conquered through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Tomorrow, life would go back to normal. The FBI investigation would quietly disappear. Tyler Morrison would vanish into whatever new identity the Federal Witness Protection Program provided, and Linda would struggle to raise her daughter while wondering what had happened to the man she'd thought loved her. But I would remember. I would remember that for 2 years, federal agents had been watching me, studying me, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. I would remember that my own wife had been turned against me by professionals who knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. Most of all, I would remember that in the world I operated in, there were no innocent victims and no permanent victories. There were only temporary truces between people who understood that loyalty was a luxury and trust was a weakness. Tyler Morrison had taught me that lesson more thoroughly than any business rival ever had, and I would never forget it. Chapter 9, The Final Accounting. 6 months after Tyler Morrison disappeared into federal witness protection, I received an invitation to Linda's wedding. She was marrying David Chun, Gregory Chin's nephew, a mild-mannered accountant who specialized in tax law for small businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda had traded her federal agent lover for the relative of one of my business rivals, though I doubted she knew about the family connection. I decided to attend. The ceremony was held in a small church on the north side of Chicago, nothing like the elaborate affair Linda had once planned for herself when she'd thought she was destined for wealth and social prominence. She wore a simple white dress, carried Emma in her arms instead of flowers, and looked genuinely happy for the first time since I'd known her. David Chun seemed like a decent man, patient with the baby, gentle with Linda, and completely unaware that his new wife had once been married to someone who destroyed his uncle's real estate empire. He probably thought he was getting a fresh start with a woman who'd had bad luck with her previous relationships. I sat in the back row, watching Linda promise to love, honor, and cherish her new husband. She never looked in my direction, never acknowledged my presence, but I knew she was aware I was there. After the ceremony, as the small group of family and friends moved to the reception at a modest restaurant nearby, Linda finally approached me. "Why did you come?" she asked. "Curiosity," I said honestly. "I wanted to see what your new life looked like. Are you here to ruin this too?" I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman I'd once loved. She was thinner now, more serious, marked by the experiences of the past year. Motherhood had changed her, added depth to her character that hadn't been there when she'd been focused on maintaining her appearance and social status. "No, Linda, I'm here to wish you well." She looked surprised. Really? You made mistakes, but you've paid for them. David seems like a good man, and Emma deserves a stable family. What about Tyler? Do you know what happened to him?" I considered telling her the truth, that Tyler Morrison had been a federal agent, that their entire relationship had been based on lies, that she'd been manipulated by professionals who'd used her feelings against both of us. But what would be the point? Linda had built a new life based on the assumption that Tyler had simply abandoned her. The truth would only cause more pain. "Tyler Morrison made his choice," I said. "He chose his own interests over his responsibilities to you and Emma. Some men are built that way." Linda nodded slowly. "I used to think you were the cold one, Greg. But Tyler, when he left, it was like he just turned off all his feelings. Like Emma and I had never mattered to him at all. Maybe you never did." It was harsh but accurate. Tyler Morrison, the person, had never existed. There had only been Special Agent Morrison playing a role designed to gather intelligence on me. Linda had fallen in love with a fiction. "I'm sorry," Linda said quietly. "For all of it. For the affair, for lying to you, for trying to manipulate you into accepting Emma as your own child. I know that doesn't undo anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I know you are. Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I looked at Linda, holding another man's baby while wearing another man's ring, and realized that forgiveness wasn't the right word for what I felt. I'd moved beyond anger, beyond hurt, even beyond the desire for revenge. What remained was a cold understanding of human nature and the lengths people would go to protect their own interests. I don't forgive you, Linda, but I don't hate you either. You're just someone I used to be married to who made decisions I couldn't live with. She accepted this with more grace than I'd expected. Will you be okay? She asked. I'll be fine. I always am. I mean, really okay. Not just successful or powerful or in control. Actually okay. The question caught me off guard. Linda was asking about something I rarely allowed myself to consider, whether the life I'd built was actually worth living or just worth winning. I'm exactly who I chose to be, I said finally. Linda nodded, understanding that this was the only answer I could give. Take care of yourself, Greg. Take care of Emma. I left the reception without speaking to anyone else, driving through Chicago as the sun set over the lake. The city looked the same as always, ambitious, relentless, beautiful in its harsh efficiency. It was the perfect place for someone like me, someone who understood that loyalty was temporary and trust was dangerous. But as I pulled into my empty driveway and walked into my empty house, I found myself thinking about Linda's question. Was I actually okay? Or had I just become so good at controlling my environment that I'd forgotten what okay felt like? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your victory. You played the game better than I gave you credit for. Tyler Morrison, checking in from whatever new life the FBI had created for him. Even in federal protection, he was still keeping tabs on the situation, still unable to let go completely. I deleted the message without responding. In my study, I poured myself a scotch and sat at my desk, surrounded by the trophies of 30 years in business. Awards, photographs with politicians and celebrities, framed deals that had made me wealthy beyond most people's dreams. I'd won. Tyler Morrison was gone, Linda was out of my life, and my business empire was stronger than ever. The FBI investigation had quietly died when Morrison disappeared, and my reputation had emerged largely intact. But as I sat alone in my perfectly appointed house, drinking expensive whiskey and reviewing the quarterly reports that showed my company's continued growth, I realized that victory and satisfaction weren't the same thing. I'd built a life where I could control every variable, eliminate every threat, and ensure that nobody could hurt me. But in making myself invulnerable, I'd also made myself isolated. I had associates, but no friends, business partners, but no companions, and enough money to buy anything except the one thing money couldn't purchase: genuine connection with another human being. Tyler Morrison had been a federal agent, but he'd at least been capable of forming real attachments, even if they were operationally inappropriate. Linda had been unfaithful, but she'd been capable of love, even if she'd given it to the wrong person. I was capable of winning. Nothing more, nothing less. My phone rang. Vincent Carballo. We've got a problem with the Morrison situation, he said. What kind of problem? The kind that suggests this isn't over. I set down my scotch and reached for a pen. After 30 years in business, I'd learned that problems were just opportunities that hadn't been properly analyzed yet. Tell me everything, I said. As Vincent began outlining the new complications that had arisen from Tyler Morrison's federal witness protection, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with facing a worthy opponent. I thought the game was over. Instead, it had just moved to a new level. And in my experience, the games that lasted the longest were always the most interesting ones. Outside my window, Chicago glittered in the darkness like a circuit board, all lights and connections and hidden currents of power. Somewhere out there, Tyler Morrison was planning his next move under a new identity, probably still convinced he could find a way to destroy me. He was wrong, of course, but I had to admire his persistence. After all, I taught him everything he knew about never giving up. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.